Girl Gaze, Journeys Through the Punjab and the UK is an interesting project by the Punjab Lalit Academy and the Creative Black Country, the UK. It brings together 4 photographers, 2 from India and 2 from the UK, and a curator, as the women traverse through the UK as well as Punjab to capture images of women, each photographer using her own sensibility and her own thematic composition to create this exhibition, which has taken more than a year to come together, with Chandigarh being the first stop for display. And today we have Uzma Mohsin, who is part of the project, speak to us about Girl Gaze. And Uzma is from Delhi, though trained as a graphic designer from NID. Photography is what engrosses and absorbs her completely. And she took places near Jalandhar to do this project, chose Jalandhar and areas around it to do the project. We speak to Uzma about Girl Gaze and her work in this exhibition. Welcome to Punjab Lalit Academy. So Uzma, you, as we spoke earlier, you trained at NID as a graphic designer, but photography was something which was very close to your heart, also practicing it.
Yeah, actually the thing is that at NID, they have a program called communication design, and it's a very open kind of a program. So it's not really that you are, you end up having a specialization now, but actually in the 5 years which you study there, you actually engage with a lot of other kind of, image making processes or whatever. It's quite an open program.
Okay.
So I ended up doing a lot of projects which were very image based things,
Okay,
because my interest was there.
Right.
And at that point of time they didn't have a specialization in photography.
Okay.
So though even my projects were all finally, even in graphic design, were very, very image based.
Okay.
They were like a book which is made out of, or something which is made out of photographs. So it's not really like typical graphic design situation for me.
Right.
But yeah, they do now have a photo specialization.
Right. So what was it about photography that made you choose it finally over anything else? What is it about the medium? And how difficult was it 20 years back maybe, Now we have more avenues for the art.
Think, yeah, for sure. It's somehow I think, I don't know what the attraction for me with images is, but definitely I have that's one way for me to express myself.
Right.
I find it, so I struggle between drawing and photographs actually. I am also a trained illustrator. Okay. As part of my NID course, I ended up also having this thing of learning drawing and kind of working with it. But I've done a lot of drawing also, but I think somehow I have kind of weaned towards the photographic image. It's definitely of interest to me. I somehow also feel that one of the things which, as of now it's definitely of interest to me, but it's also something about, I think, when I was drawing, it's a very kind of a on your own situation, but where you come and you kind of, you're in your own world. What I also find very nice about photography is its engagement with real people and real situations and the real world. And you also have to not only, I'm sure drawing also you do it, but you come back and you kind of channel it in your somehow isolated studio or whatever.
Right.
But with photography, the encounters are really real, you have to take your camera, go out there and then engage with that. And that's very kind of exciting, because finally at the heart of it, I find I would like to tell stories, and that's my, I guess, yeah. That is what I, for right now, definitely find interesting. And it's also interesting that how, if you look now, how the camera has become such an important part of the newer generation. If you look at it, like, there is a thing about the photographic image, and people find a kind of some kind of a resonance of, looking at it, finding a connection with it.
True.
You see the craze of selfies nowadays. It obviously, we have some kind of a
right.
way of reflecting on life, obviously. And I mean, think a camera kind of works in some way, for sure.
But what is the kind of images that you as a photographer tend to lean towards, or is there a thematic?
So my journey is like I started, my earlier works were more like, they were more documentary, like a straight off documentary, like where I would go to some place and I would try and understand what it is and try and make images around, you know, that particular subject. My earliest works is a body of work on women in circuses.
Interesting.
Yeah, so, and it's looking at their lives in the backstage situation, like not as on the performing,
like in the green rooms or in
the
it's
houses, outside, in their tents or in the backstage of the performance. Yeah, so I mean, started off with more kind of docu situation, like a documentary kind of a thing. Then I ended up working with PLKA, so I also worked on some stories which are very photojournalistic. I mean, I traveled to Kashmir, I did 2 pieces on Kashmir, then I did like a feature, which like that way it was more than discussing stuff, and then, you know, you would go for a kind of a assignment situation, something like that we would do. And then finally, after I left PLKA, I mean, for me now it's become more, after that I traveled to Europe, I mean to Switzerland, I traveled to Europe, and there I worked on things which I found interesting, or which were kind of, you know, somehow when you go into a space and you look at it and then you come up, you know, we all have questions about where we stay, or, you know, you'll always have that. So my work now tends to be a little more on, I mean, it's really not following the clear-cut, very documentary or very photojournalistic or kind of thing. I would say I like to work on things which I like, and I try and, it's like a slightly longer format. You know, that's what I try and do.
And is it, I mean, do you have an end in mind, a book, an exhibition?
Yeah, I usually, I'm a great lover of books, so I make a lot of photo books, small journals, which are not even photo books, because nowadays the term photo book is like this one body of work which you take out. But I actually end up making a lot of, because I keep using the camera, I try and make small journals, you know, but they're photographic actually. So that format I really enjoy. But yes, for sure,
and these of course are like your one series of work which will be turned into a photojournal. That's how it works.
So then I'm working on things and I try and put it in a photojournal.
So it also becomes a kind of, you have a memory bank. Okay, great. So how did this project come to you, Uzma, and if you could talk a little about it.
So the thing is that I think this work, I mean, Iona is the main person who is the curator, and obviously she kind of was, I mean, she was looking at the photographic community here in India and looking at people and asking them to send their respective works. So I sent my work, and I think after her selection process, I guess she must have opted for me. So, I mean, it was a kind of like a selection situation where people had to, obviously, because we work like that, you know, you have to send in your portfolio, people see if you are, if your images or whatever.
So when you got this project, what did you envision it, or how did you?
No, actually I didn't. The thing is, I mean, obviously you have to research what you want to do, and I did all the reading or whatever, but it was also my travel to UK for the first time. And for me somehow, I mean, obviously I was reading about the area and whatever. Yes. And but I ended up also reading a bit of literature, and I think that would be the starting point for the work for me. I was reading this book called The Boy with the Top Knot. It's written by a young British Asian person. His name is Satnam Sanghera, And I just happened to be reading because I was researching, and then I was asking a lot of people about the area, whatever, and this friend suggested that, she said, oh, you should read this book has come out and it's like, about that area. So I actually walked into Wolverhampton. When I flew down, I was, it kind of felt wonderfully strange to be reading this book about the same place I was sitting in.
Exactly.
And I was a stranger there. And that was like, that's also it's a kind of a biography. Autobiography. It's autobiographical. I mean, I wouldn't call it a straight up autobiography, but it's autobiographical. And so I ended up then reading more books. There are two specially I read, and they are from that area of two people. One is a first generation person, and it's actually, I ended up meeting the couple and I interviewed them lots, and I actually have them even in the photographs.
Yeah.
Actually, I have their story, not them. They have a lovely story. The book is called Meri Kahani, and it's written actually in Punjabi. Then I got a Hindi version of it, and I ended up reading the Hindi version. But it's written by this gentleman called Gurmail Bhamra, and his wife's name is Kulwant Kaur. And they actually are one of the earliest. I mean, they went in 60s, in the 60s, 62 या 60 ऐसे गए. And so they had a kind of a interesting loves. I mean, these personal accounts became very of much interest to me.
Right.
And then I started talking to a lot of people, and then I came up with this thing about women, that after spending so much time and asking, I really felt that something, in most cases, I mean, the lives of the women who had gone in the first generation, I mean, that it was all about the love story, finally. Because in some way the women kind of were married off and they came to this completely strange land, and somewhere this personal journey was responsible for what was happening to them. So I then thought of this, and then there's this whole thing of relationships and bonds, how you define them, what's your family relationships, your community relationships, your own sisterhood relationships with other women, so that kind of became the focus of the work.
And this was in the UK. This is what you felt in the UK.
This is exactly what I felt in the UK.
And did it involve meeting a lot of people and interviewing? And
So actually the thing is that because of my grounding in journalism and in Tehelka, my procedure of work is very journalistic. Actually, I end up meeting a lot of people, spending a lot of time talking to them. I do not take out the camera. I don't walk into the space and start shooting. No, I spend a lot of time. I usually try and understand what they have to say before I actually make the images. The images come a bit later.
And does it help in curating the images? Does it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you don't have an understanding of the story, it's very difficult. So my thing is to get a solid understanding of the story, and then what I do is now I try and kind of, I mean, in this work I have kind of abstracted it or layered it with other things, and there's a kind of, it's more like a visual poem. Like this one. And I wrote actually a boli which goes with it. And so, I mean, you're then playing with form and you're doing other things. But definitely you have to have a good understanding of your subject.
So text and then photographs, and it all comes together. And how was the experience different here in Jalandhar, near Jalandhar, you said? And why did you choose this area?
So most of the people who travelled to the Midlands where I was, they are all from in and around Jalandhar. So that's why the reason to come to Jalandhar was that so the story is basically that these guys went in as early as 1940s, but the earliest person I met was from 1950s. And they went as hard, like, labor. They had to work in foundries, and
this is a mining area and industrial.
It's an industrial area. It's in England's very like a mining industry or coal, that kind of steel works and those kind of things. So they worked really hard. I mean, that's one thing, that the Punjabis worked really hard. Like, this is like seriously hard labor work. And they made sure that the second generation gets a good education. And they definitely, the second generation is in much better place than the first one, for sure, or the third generation is even probably better. So there is this angle of the situation, but when I came, so I had this idea, but I also wanted to visit what is the situation here. And it's not all that rosy, obviously. There are some, there are a lot of these land issues, because many of the people have left their land with other people or something. So there's sometimes these not comfortable situations, or there's this land grabbing, acquisition, those kind of complicated situations. Then there is the question of them, many of them, they come here, they marry young women, they don't take the women back. I was researching a lot of this thing of, reading up on the papers and stuff. There's this thing called honeymoon wives, where they come and marry and then they leave the wife or whatever. So I met those kind of people also, but also I went and met some of them. Sometimes the parents don't adjust outside, so they get left behind, or they do not want their parents to come because it's very expensive. I actually went to a old age home up near Jalandhar, which is run by a UK based NRI, and they take care of abandoned people, and many of them I have put a picture of a lady there, but her daughter was in the UK, and she is here. And they were saying that the caretaker of the home, or the manager of the person of the old age home, was telling me in many cases what the children say is that you just call us when they are not there, and they don't even send like £10 a month sometimes. So there is all kinds of situations, and I can feel, you can say, oh, how horrible, but I can also see over there that UK is so expensive. If you had 2-3 children and you were to work, like, people work there, so there are these all kinds of different stories. Now what you have to see is, for me, that's why it's not like a black and white situation. So I guess you have to.
And this is what you try to
so I try to like
both
put
the perspectives.
at least have a little bit of both sides. That would at least balance the situation a bit. But I think then in the because I have done it like a recital, actually, the text and the images. It's also got this element of the Pulkari in it. I tried to, because I was talking to somebody and they were telling me how, that here the women would embroider, the mothers would embroider it, or the grandmothers would embroider it, and then they would, like the girl would also probably do some bit. But the Pulkari was something special in your trousseau, because it kind of had that memory of your home, and it's also about like somewhere, it's something very close to your heart, because it's also about solace. So I tried to also incorporate a bit of, that was also one of the motives in my head when I was doing it. So the installation, actually, it's in the installation, the threads are going, and there are connections also, so it's a little like you try and incorporate that.
So what's next now that you're?
I'm already on another grant, actually. There is a grant which is given by the Al-Qazi Foundation for the Arts. They actually do give 2 grants, one to do a photo book, and one is on a documentary. It's called the documentary grant, and I'm actually working on something
on a documentary.
It's a grant. It's called documentary, but they are very open about ideas around documentary. So
wonderful. So you're working on that.
I'm hoping that I'll
Great.
So I'm on a grant right now.